Hello and welcome to Seven Daughters and Seven Sons. This is Mrs. Cat. Oh, wait, hold on. All right, things haven't changed that much. There I am. Welcome to Mrs. Hardgrave's classes. We are super excited to be working on this project together. So without further ado, let's head over to our book. I am going to be taking this first chapter of Seven Daughters and Seven Sons. We will be pausing periodically to talk about vocab words that I think are important for you to know while we're reading. And at the end, there will be some questions for you to answer. All right, Seven Daughters and Seven Sons by Barbara Cohen and Bahia Lovejoy. These are the words written long ago by Bahram, daughter of Malik, a poor shopkeeper of Baghdad. She put them down so that her children, and their children, and their children, and all those who came after them would know of the remarkable events that had given rise to their illustrious line. And wonders of wonders, she wrote all of these words in her own hand, forming each beautiful Arabic letter with perfect precision and grace. For her father had taught her to read and write when she was very young, even though it was not the custom of her time for girls to learn such things. Read these words then, and open your eyes wide in amazement at the marvels that Allah has wrought. Quick note, Allah is the word for God in the Islamic faith. We are studying a book that takes place in the Middle East, where Islam is the predominant religion. You can see that it's the green color. And in this part of the world, that is the majority religion. And the country that our book is starting in is this one right here, Iraq, as you may already know from the pretest. So from time to time, characters will refer to Allah because it is their word for God. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get further into the book. But for now, let's continue. I am Bahram, daughter of Malik, and the fourth of the 7 female children born to him, and to his wife of holy memory, my mother, Zubaydah. My father was called Abu al-Banat, the father of daughters, and the title was not considered an honorable one. Allah had not seen fit to bless him with sons, and all that happened afterwards stemmed from that fact. O my children, the ways of Allah are beyond human understanding. What we imagine to be a blessing can actually be a curse, and what we suppose to be a curse may blossom into a blessing. The marvelous chain of events about which I will tell you began one evening as I sat in the courtyard with my father playing chess. It was spring. The scent of jasmine hung thick in the air as we moved first one piece and then another. The pale light died away. The moon had not yet risen. The wooden shutters on the windows of our little house of baked bricks had been removed, and the light from the oil lamps inside made bright squares on the ground. But our board was too far from the windows to catch the light, and in time it grew too dark to see the chessmen. With his hand, my father swept the pieces aside. "That's enough of that," he said. "Oh, my daughter, I declare you the winner." "But father," I assured him, "I wasn't even close to putting your king in check." My father laughed. 6 moves more, 7 moves more, what difference does it make? Sooner or later, you would have checked my king and mated my king, just as you always do. It was a dark day for me when I taught you this foolish game. Your mother scolded me. She said your time would be better spent with your needle or your loom than in learning men's amusements." He sighed a vast mocking sigh. "Ah me! I should have listened to your mother." Oh, my father," I murmured. "I'm glad you didn't." I knew he was glad too. He loved to play chess. It was a precious distraction from his daily struggle to support our crowded household. Since he had no sons, he had been forced to teach the game to one of his daughters, if he was to play it at all, for he had neither the time nor the money to gamble with other men in the shops of the souks. As you may guess, here are some pictures of souks. They are what we would call a marketplace, a place where people gather, socialize, and her father has a shop there, so he is there quite a bit, but can't afford to gamble, so he doesn't play chess there like other men do. Iberon was the one he had chosen. Perhaps he had chosen me because I was so clumsy at all the tasks my mother set me around the house that he felt it was I she could best spare. Or perhaps he chose me because I was the one who wanted with all my heart to learn. I knelt on the ground to pick up the scattered pieces. In the street beyond our wall I could hear voices and the sound of footsteps echoing in the night. The footsteps halted at our gate, and through the wooden slats I caught a glimpse of lantern light and the whirl of 2 or 3 striped jubbas fashioned of fine linen. There's a picture of a jubba. Even before my father spoke, I knew who had stopped at our house. Go indoors, my father ordered. Tell your mother to prepare a drink of yogurt. Your uncle and some of his sons have come to call on me, he added with a sigh. It was a real sigh this time. Our house was small. It was necessary for my father to detain my uncle and cousins in our courtyard while my mother prepared the drink and laid out a few sweetmeats. And here are some pictures of a yogurt drink in a copper cup like they may have had, and what they would have called sweetmeats, dried fruit like dates, or maybe a little bit of a simple pastry. A paltry display, she complained. But it's the best I can do. It's all we have. I knew that was true. Your uncle is unbelievably thoughtless to call on his brother here at home, my mother continued crossly. He knows we can't afford to entertain him properly. Why didn't he go to see your father in the shop the way he usually does? When the food was laid out, she, my sisters, and I withdrew to the other room. My sisters were soon busy with their sewing and their embroidering, their spinning and their gossiping, though what they found to talk about so endlessly when they went nowhere and saw no one was beyond my comprehension. Still, I envied them, for they never seemed to be afflicted with the fits of melancholy that overcame me when I wondered what would become of them, what would become of me, what would become of all of us. Allah will provide, they always said. Allah will provide. And then they would go on with their ceaseless stitching, their endless chatter. They were content to be just what they were. There were times when I longed to jump right out of my skin and into someone else's, like my cousin Hassan's or my cousin Ali's. It was they who had come to call on my father along with my uncle. I stood by the curtained doorway and listened to the conversation between my father, his brother, and my 2 oldest cousins. It was wrong to listen, but I'd always done it, and so accustomed were my mother and my sisters to this habit of mine that they'd long ago stopped scolding me for it. I think they were rather glad I listened, because then I could tell them all that had been said. That is, I told my sisters. My father told my mother. Your visit does honor to my poor home, I heard my father intone politely as he escorted his brother and his nephews out of the courtyard, through the arched hall or iwan, and into the main room of our house. So the architecture in many parts of the Middle East, especially in the Middle Ages, would have been very different. Archways had generally a point at the top. And this type of arch has a special name. It is called an iwan. Well, there's a reason for it, O father of girls, my uncle said, His proud, sneering voice always made me want to shake him. How could my father be so unfailingly polite to him, so pleasant? It wasn't because my father, a poor man, expected any help from his brother, though my uncle could have provided bridal gifts for all 7 of us and never even noticed that the money was gone. Generous, courteous, and kind. My father's manner was the same whether he was talking to a beggar or the richest merchant in Baghdad. But my uncle didn't know that. He was accustomed to receiving the grossest flattery, simply because he was rich. Most people he encountered, perhaps, thought they could get something from him. My father knew better. "Oh, my brother, please seat yourself. Please drink some yogurt before you tell me why you've honored me this evening," my father urged. Just, "Oh, my brother," not "Oh, father of sons," or even Abu Hassan. This was the only expression of annoyance that my father permitted himself, and I'm sure my uncle didn't even notice. He wasn't in the habit of really listening to anyone he regarded as less important than himself. I moved closer to the curtain and pushed it aside so that the merest crack of space appeared between the curtain and the jamb. Now I could see into the room. I could see my father and my uncle and my 2 cousins, sitting on cushions and sipping yogurt from copper cups. My father didn't touch the sweets, and my uncle only nibbled at them to be polite. But Hassan and Ali gobbled up every morsel on the plate, oblivious to the fact that on account of their greed, their 7 cousins would have nothing but beans and onions to eat for the rest of the week. "Listen to me, O father of girls," said my uncle. "Your eldest nephew, Hassan, knows his duty to the members of his family. He's come to take his leave of you. At first light tomorrow, he departs with the caravan for the coast, and from there he sails to Alexandria." "Alexandria!" my father cried. "Alexandria, so far away? Why do you go, oh my nephew?" I wanted to cry out too. Of my uncle's 7 sons, I loved my cousin Hassan the best, even if he was a greedy young man who'd just eaten up all of our cakes. When I was little, he hadn't been like his brothers. He'd been willing to play hide and seek and tag in the courtyard with me, even though I was a girl. Of course, as we got older, we weren't allowed to see each other face to face, but nevertheless, I had managed to catch glimpses of him through windows and curtains, just as I was doing now. He had grown into a handsome man with soft, dark eyes, curling black hair, and a wide, smiling mouth. I focused every scrap of my attention on him, and as he answered my father. "Uncle Hassan said, "I'm going to Alexandria because my father wants me to go. He's given me enough capital to set up shop there. Think of the advantages to him of having both an outlet and a source in 2 cities instead of in Baghdad alone." "As soon as Hassan's on his feet, I'm to leave," Ali announced proudly. "I'm to set up on the island of Cyprus." "It's a wonderful thing to have sons," my uncle said. "Allah has blessed me beyond belief. 7 sons, 7 healthy, intelligent sons. It's something you can't imagine, O father of daughters." "My daughters are beautiful girls, modest girls," my father replied quietly. "Each one is more precious to me than all the jewels in the Caliph's vaults." Of course, my uncle replied in a tone heavy with condescension. "Naturally you love them. They're good girls, very good girls. But after all, what use are so many of them?" He smiled and sipped his yogurt. My poor father didn't answer. What answer could he make? All of Baghdad considered him, with his 7 daughters, as cursed as his brother of 7 sons was blessed. The fact that he was poor and his brother was rich only served to reinforce the general opinion. And listen to this, my uncle, Ali went on. When I'm properly established in Cyprus, my brother Ibrahim will set up shop in Sidon. And when he's established, the next one will go, and the next, and the next, and the next. Soon there won't be an import town on the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea that doesn't boast a branch of Abu Hassan, merchant suppliers. We'll corner all the goods, and in no time we'll have cornered all the money too. You'd better leave a little bit for your customers, my father commented, the faintest touch of asperity or harshness in his voice. Otherwise, how will they manage to buy from you? Not to worry, Uncle, Hassan said, his black eyes gleaming in the lamplight. The sons of my father will spend as well as we earn. We won't live like beggars in the cities where we set up shop. We'll live as befits our station. As befits your station? My uncle interrupted severely. No better? And no worse, Hassan replied, still smiling. I smiled too, behind the curtain. Hassan hadn't changed in all these years. Perhaps he was now a man of business, but still, the most important thing in life to him was having a good time. My father reached out and touched his brother's hand. "O son of my mother," he said, his forehead wrinkled, his voice slow, as if he found what he now had to say difficult to get out of his mouth. Listen to me. Wouldn't it be wise to see that Hassan is properly married before you send him off to a strange city where he'll be exposed to all kinds of temptations, far from strong and loving hands to guide him? My uncle's eyes were narrow, though his lips smiled. I dare say you have a suitable wife in mind, O father of daughters, he replied, his voice cold. My father bowed his head. My Baran, he said. I could scarcely hear him, his voice was so low, but my heart leaped at his words. It was my second most cherished dream to be the bride of my cousin Hassan. My first most cherished dream was so fantastic that I hardly ever dared to dream it, and perhaps if my second one came true, I'd be willing to give up the first one entirely. Your Baran? Hassan echoed. Your Baran? I watched him shake his head vigorously. My father didn't see that gesture. Why not? He asked, lifting his own head and speaking more firmly now. Her mother named her for Queen Baran, whose wedding 200 years ago was so lavish that it remains to this day a byword for magnificence. His smile was wry and mocking. I can't provide my Baran with any but the simplest wedding. You know that as well as I. But what of that? What's important is that my Baran, like her namesake, is as clever as she is beautiful. Besides, she's your cousin. What could be more suitable? Okay, now I can hear you all from here, so let's hit the pause button for just a second. We are speaking about a time that is approximately 1,000 years ago, and for much of history and in much of the world, marrying cousins was completely acceptable. Now, I know to us here and to you perhaps out there, that is not something that you would like to consider. So have no fear. But let's not worry about it too much. This is just a normal reality of the time and place that this story takes place. And now back to the story. Oh, my brother, believe me, my uncle said, his voice thick with oily politeness. If she came to her husband with just a little something, just the barest smidgen beyond her own lovely self, I wouldn't hesitate a moment. I think, though, that it would be more appropriate for you to offer Fatima, your eldest, who to my mind is certainly the best looking. Then he shrugged. But what difference does it make? Hassan won't marry any of them, and neither will any of my other sons. The courtesy had slipped out of his voice, and its usual harshness filled the room. It's not for them to marry girls from poor families. They'll marry the richest girls I can find them. My Baran will be a true helpmeet to the man fortunate enough to win her, my father replied proudly. I was filled with joy at his words. I had always known that he loved me, but until that night I hadn't known how much. Her eyelash is worth more than all the gold of the wealthiest girl on earth. Come now, brother, my uncle said. You never were a practical man, never. That's why you're no further along in business today than you were when you started out. May Allah bless you and all of your daughters. May He send them husbands worthy of their beauty and their goodness. But those husbands won't be sons of mine. I don't like to imagine whose sons they'll be, he added unnecessarily, since you can provide them with nothing. My father turned toward Hassan. For all my joy at discovering how much I meant to my father, it hurt my heart to see him forced to humble himself for our sakes. Hassan, you were fond of Baran when you were a boy. It was always the clearest wish of my heart that one day you too would make a match of it. Hassan laughed. This time the sound didn't ring as pleasantly in my ears as it had a moment before. Oh, she was just a tag-along, he said lightly. She insisted on playing boys' games. What was I to do? Beat her off? Now I don't even know what she looks like. Why should I be saddled with a girl who's poor and probably ugly to boot? Uncle, you mustn't presume on our relationship. How dared Hassan speak so to my father? How dared he speak to him without respect? But his own father said nothing. His own father didn't scold him for such inexcusable rudeness. My uncle didn't even correct Hassan when he called me ugly, and my uncle certainly knew better. I was the least beautiful among the 7 of us, but to be the least in such a company could scarcely be catalogued as ugly. My father rose from his seat. Listen to me, Hassan, he said. You're a free man. You can refuse to marry anyone, including my daughter, but you dare not speak ill of her before her own father. I think it would be wisest if you left now. Brother, you're too hasty, my uncle began. May your journey be a safe one, Hassan. My father ignored his brother. May Allah prosper you in all you undertake. May He keep you in health, and may He save you from regretting the things that you have said in this house tonight. With another word, he turned his back on them, crossed the floor, and passed through the curtain into the room where I was waiting with my mother and sisters. He stopped short when he saw me standing at the opening. He knew I'd been eavesdropping. I'm sorry you heard what you heard this night, my daughter, he said to me. But perhaps you've learned your lesson. Perhaps you'll no longer listen to conversations not intended for your ears. He walked right through the room and without another word to anyone, let himself out through the back door. What is it? My oldest sister Fatima asked me urgently. What is it? Tell us what they said. Why is my father so angry? I didn't blame her for her surprise. Our father was often melancholy, but almost never harsh or unkind. My uncle thinks you're the most beautiful of the 7 of us, I replied. Aren't you pleased? It's kind of him to say so, Fatima said, preening a little. My uncle was right on that issue at least. Fatima was certainly the handsomest. She was skinny and flat like me. Oh, she wasn't skinny and flat like me. Excuse me. My mother agreed. He only speaks the truth, she said. There's no cause for anger in that. But he wouldn't allow his sons to marry one of us if we were the last girls on earth, I explained, keeping all emotion out of my voice. He and his sons have no use for poor brides, even if they are cousins. The ties of blood don't mean anything to them. And to hear this, my father had to humble himself. Did Hassan speak so? My mother asked. Even Hassan? She hadn't been blind to our childhood friendship. Hassan even more than his father, I cried, dropping my pretense of control. Don't mention Hassan to me. I don't ever want to hear his name again. Suddenly, Fatima began to cry. Duraira, who was the youngest, crept close to her and put her arms about her. Sharifa and Amina stared at her, fear in their faces. Fatima was always cheerful, always serene. If even Fatima was weeping, there could be no joy left anywhere in Baghdad. Please, Fatima, don't cry, Sharifa begged. Please stop. There's no reason to cry, Zainab added sternly. She was the second to the oldest and the most like my mother. But my mother knew why Fatima was crying, even if Zainab didn't, and my mother spoke to her in a far gentler tone than was customary with her. Don't weep, my daughter, she said. Allah will provide a husband for you. He provided one for me, who came from a poor family too, and he'll provide one for you. We must place our faith in Allah and not complain. Fatima sniffed back her tears. I always believed that, my mother. I always believed that with my whole heart, but tonight, I wonder what they'll be like, those husbands that Allah will provide for us. And I knew what she was thinking. I knew what all of my sisters were thinking. They were thinking the thoughts that had until this night they'd been able to push down to the bottom of their minds. Who were the husbands of girls without money? Poor farmers from the country for whom a wife was a beast of burden, cheaper to feed than a donkey? Rich old men who already had 2 or 3 others and were looking now for a young one to warm their ancient bones and to further increase the consequence of the first wife, the one who counted? Thieves and assassins who sought women with no family, or with families powerless to protect their daughters from whatever abominations their husbands chose to inflict upon them? Think of your father, my mother said. Think of him. He's my husband, and he took me, though I came to him with nothing. Could I have gotten a better husband if I had brought with me gifts worth 1,000 dinars? My sisters were silent. They suspected that there was no other man in all the land between the 2 rivers like my father, and my mother knew it for a fact. Long after we were all supposed to be asleep on the roof, we heard my mother and my father talking together in the courtyard below us. They kept their voices soft enough so that we couldn't catch their words, but we understood the tone. My mother was very angry. My father was very worried. One by one, my sisters drifted off. Still, I could hear my mother and my father talking, discussing, arguing, and then beginning all over again. When at last my own eyelids were so heavy with sleep that even my swirling brain couldn't keep them from closing, I could still hear, as I sank into slumber, the rise and fall of their voices. And that is where we are going to stop for today. I so hope that you've enjoyed your first passage. Please answer the questions that follow.